So welcome everybody. We are here today, it's morning where I am, to share with you a project that we've been working on for several months with teachers in one of our local areas. The presentation, as you can see, is called Empowering Learner-Generated Virtual Contexts for Science Education and Environmental Explorations. And those are the three of us that will be presenting this, although the team that is doing the project is a bit larger, and we'll explain that soon. Here is our team that will be talking to you today. That is me on the left, Aida and Hemalatha. Today we want to do a few things with you to help you prepare for working with students with what we refer to as virtual contexts, and we'll explain that term as we go forward. We're going to use Google Tour Creator as a tool for generating virtual contexts, and we're going to focus largely on place-based education, and we'll explain what that is as well. We find this to be a tool for critical thinking with students and for interdisciplinary learning. We'll explain some of the cognitive theory behind what we're doing with virtual contexts and how we can use virtual context to integrate a variety of media, which is an important part of that learning theory. And then talk about how these virtual contexts can supplement real-world experiences in environmental field trips and in schoolyard investigations when we can do those with students again after we are past the pandemic. So now I'm going to introduce Hema, who will share a few things about the background of the project. Hema?
Yes, I'm on. Thank you, Ed. So to quickly give you some background on this project is called Classroom Co-Creation of Virtual Contexts, which is a partnership between AGI, Salisbury University, Arizona State University, the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and most importantly, Somerset County teachers, elementary school and middle school. So Ed, if you could please move on to the next slide, please. So just to give you a quick perspective on where Somerset County is. Somerset County is on the east coast of the United States. It borders the Chesapeake Bay, and it's where you see a circle on the map. So this entire presentation is a product of some of the lessons and some of the partnerships that were actually part of this program. So Ed, if you could please move on to the next slide, please. Thank you.
There's a bit of a delay. I'm going to have to anticipate better. Excuse me for that. There we go.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Aida Awad. I wanted to sort of set the stage here for virtual context. As we entered into March, and many of our students, or most of our students, were sent home to continue their learning for the rest of the school year at home, we were faced with the problem where those students weren't able to go out on their scheduled field trips for their geoscience and environmental science courses. And so when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, which is exactly what we did here. We started to look for real opportunities to keep our students engaged in the coursework that we had begun with them earlier in the school year. And that included preparing them for the eventuality of taking those trips. It provided really great opportunities for interdisciplinary instruction, and we'll talk later about the 4 C's, collaboration, communication, and the other 2 C's, which we'll dig into a little bit later. It did help us to work with students on encouraging critical thinking, not only about their environmental science courses, but about ways that they could connect other content areas. And one thing that we particularly wanted them to connect was a place-based approach to their learning. And we're going to come back to place-based approach a little bit more deeply in just a few minutes. I'm going to move ahead, Ed. Thank you. turn this back over to Dr. Robeck.
And so now what we want to do is show you what we mean by a virtual context. So I'm going to take you to one that I've already created, and we'll be sharing with you a website that includes several virtual contexts that the teachers in the project made. So I'm going to go here to a website, and I believe now that you're able to see a virtual context that I created near my home, and we wanted to do this in a place that was local to us. A lot of the environmental education that goes on in some very special places, but in these times we all want to emphasize that the availability of spaces in schoolyards, in parks, places near our homes can also be used. So one of the things that we can do here is just look around. Now this is a fully spherical image. We're using Google Tour Creator, so we can look up and down and around and just get used to the place a little bit. One of the things that we emphasize is that these places have a lot of different meanings for us. So if you notice in the information that I wrote here, I mentioned why I used this scene particularly. I see a lot of creatures here. So when we're talking about the biosphere, which is one of the Earth's systems, this is a good place for me to think about that. So this is what's called a point of interest. This one is a diagram of the Earth systems. I'm not going to go into Earth systems today. This is something that we teach about, and the students will be familiar with this diagram. And then we can look at other points of interest. Here's one. You can see that there was a deer in that photo. So this is one of the living things that's here. We can think about what Earth systems relate to it and interact with it. There's an owl up in the tree that we can see as well. And I wanted to have something where some parts of the Earth systems that I couldn't all get in one photo were talked about together. So I actually got out my markers and created some art to illustrate this so that we can relate these to each other. We also think a lot about the history of a place. The tall trees here, as you can see, they're quite tall. These are second growth forest. The first growth, the original forest was cut down several hundred years ago, and the logs were used in lumber mills like this to create boats and homes and other things. So this is a historic photograph. Actually, it's a postcard that was collected from a nearby historical center. So that's one scene. Here's another. This is in the woods nearby, and you can see that this one, you can look around as well. And this is a place where there's a stream, so this is a good place to talk about water on the Earth. We can look at the different photos, leaves after a rainstorm, and ask, where does that water go? We can also look at the stream itself and think about where that water comes from. But we can also include things like a map of the area and think about where is this stream in relation to other things on the map. And then also include data that we can look at and think about how much rain there really is here. And I've put the website that data came from so that the students and others looking at this can use that site to find more recent data. This is for this month, but of course this will need to be changed from time to time. So the question is, how did I make this virtual context? To do that, we go to Google Tour Creator, and you'll see that there's a button there that says Get Started. So I'm just going to go through a few of the steps here very, very quickly, so you can see that this is something that you can do pretty straightforwardly. Now, I already have several tours that I've created. I'm going to create a new tour today, and I start by selecting a cover image. And I already have all of my images in a folder to make this easy. So I just select that image, and I can then call this a demonstration for UAE Forum, because I'm just going to demonstrate some things. And I can type the description of place. I can say anything I want to there, and I can select a category or not. In this case, I'm going to select nature, and I create this tour. Now I can go here and I can use Google Maps to search. I'm going to choose not to. I'm going to go ahead and upload an image, and these images, these are going to set the scene. So these need to be panoramic images, or they need to be fully spherical 360 images. I'm going to use a 360 here. And you can see that it looks a little odd. And actually, that's interesting. The screen is covering one of my buttons, so we'll see if I can make this work. There, I'll just try minimizing that. There we go. Okay, but when it's public, when it's put into the tour, it looks better. It's stretched out when it's just a flat photo. And then I can say this is the edge of the forest. And I can add sound if I want to, but I'm not going to today just for time. I can talk about the location, and I can add what's referred to as a point of interest. Now, the first one I'm going to add, I can add a picture to that. So you already saw this one. I'm going to go ahead and add this deer image here. And that's going to upload to Google Tour Creator. And you can see that it's a bit large and maybe not where I want it. So I can move it around. I can size it, bring it down to the size I want. And I can place it wherever I want to on the page. And then when I open this, that's what I'll see. And I can type its name. This is a deer. And I can then describe this. But an important point here is that while this says to describe this point of interest, I may want to do something like ask a question, such as what parts of the Earth system does the deer interact with? So I can put whatever text I want to in there, and I can go on and continue adding points of interest. And maybe this might be my owl, and I can upload that photo. And I can go through this process several different times, and I can add another scene as well. So this one was, my second scene here was the scene with the forest. So I just navigate to that image, and I upload that the same way I did the first one. So as you can see, there are a number of steps, but they're pretty straightforward steps to follow. Once students learn them, they're able to do these steps pretty fluently, and they can use this then to use a number of different media and think about what they want to communicate as part of their virtual tour. Then I would publish this, and I have two options for publishing. I can publish it as unlisted, which means only people who have the link can see it. Otherwise, I can put it as public, which means somebody searching for it might be able to find that in the Poly app where these are housed. So that's a quick demonstration of how one creates a virtual tour. I'm going to go back now to our PowerPoint. So you may have heard the term virtual field trips, and we have colleagues who have done a lot of work with virtual field trips. We like virtual field trips a lot. We think that they're very powerful. We contrast those with what we're referring to as virtual contexts. Virtual field trips are tools that are made by others that students or others can go to, and they can explore around the way I showed you with this one, but they're not involved in making them. They do emphasize virtual engagement, And sometimes they can be used to make accessible places where somebody can't go. There might be a virtual field trip of Antarctica or of someplace like the Grand Canyon in the US. And they reinforce content that we have been teaching in our classes through visual means and allowing students to explore. Where virtual contexts are different is that we're emphasizing that here that students can have a role in creating these. And these are very important to us. On the prior slide, there was a definition of virtual contexts in which virtual contexts are spaces in which students are actively engaged in planning and making decisions as they generate a product for a specific purpose. So we're really emphasizing the students having a role in these as well. They can encourage planning for actual field trips when those become available, and they call on interdisciplinary knowledge and skills, promoting multiple perspectives. What these two tools share is that they're both visually rich, they can allow some unstructured movement, they can use a number of different media, and importantly, they evoke something called a sense of place. And at this point, Aida is going to share with us some ideas about this idea of sense of place.
Thank you, Ed. So I want to take us a little bit more deeply into this idea of sense of place, and I'm going to ask you to please do me a favor. If you would please just close your eyes just for about 10 seconds and think about a place that has a deep meaning for you. Just close your eyes and think about a place that has a deep meaning for you. Thank you. Now think about what it means, why it is meaningful to you. What is it about that particular place that has such a deep meaning for you? And if we now turn our attention to thinking about our students, what places would your students select as places that have deep meanings for them? And here the opportunity for us is to build connections between those places that our students find so deeply meaningful and the curriculum that we're teaching. And remember that virtual context, as we saw in Dr. Robeck's beautiful example, can be very interdisciplinary. So think very broadly when you're thinking about those curricular connections. We'll go on to the next slide, please. In this next slide that's going to pop up, there it is, thank you. We're going to take a look at some of the work of Dr. Steve Sumkin, who's at Arizona State University. His work on place-based teaching describes the 5 design elements of a place-based teaching project. So we're going to start here on the left bottom corner and just note that one of those 5 design elements is that we're focusing the content on the natural attributes of that place under study. So the place that you thought of as your meaningful place, or a place that your students might pick, what are the natural attributes of that particular place? And then moving around in a clockwise direction, how do we meaningfully integrate the cultural attributes of the place in ways that are appropriate and that add context and add relevance? So now we have 2 of those design elements, the natural attributes and the cultural attributes. And as we are thinking about teaching about those places, connecting to our content, we want to teach with authentic experiences. And in this particular time, we're not able to do that in the place itself. That would be ideal. But we can do that in a way that evokes that place, that brings that place to mind. Moving on to the 4th design element, we want to promote environmentally and culturally sustainable practices and policies in and relevant to the place that we're studying. And we're doing that in a way that we encourage and guide students to form their own intellectual and emotional connections to that place. So through these 5 design elements, we have now helped our students to have a sense of that place, a deep meaning for that place that is connected well with our curriculum. We're going to move on to the next slide, please.
So when we think about this idea of place-based education, again, relying largely on the work of Dr. Steve Semkin, who was one of the people on the team that undertook this project, we think about something called place meanings. People assign a lot of different meanings to places. These might be aesthetic, they might find the place beautiful, they might have some cultural significance to a person or to a group. There might be historical significance about where the lumber came from in the images that I shared with you earlier, or scientific ideas such as Earth's systems. And then they also form attachments to those places. They might find them very positive places to be. They might find that they find themselves very curious when they're there, or relaxed, or excited to be there. But they may also have negative reactions to the place. These can be place aversions. So this idea of place attachment can be both positive and negative about a place. And that's important to realize, that students may not always feel entirely comfortable in a place that we're talking about, or that we're planning on taking them to at some point. These place meanings and place attachments together create what we call a sense of place. That is the set of place meanings and place attachments held by the individual or group. And this is what we're really trying to tap into with this technique of using virtual contexts, because it is this idea of sense of place, that if we can build a positive sense of place about a location, and as they attach meanings and attachments to the place, it moves from being just a location to being what's referred to as a place. And that sense of place, that positive sense of place, ultimately leads to positive behavior such as pro-environmental attitudes towards sustainability and wanting to maintain the place in a positive way. Aida?
So to kind of put a little bit of a wrap on our discussion here about developing a sense of place or evoking a sense of place, I'm showing you some of my students here who were actually able to go out into the field, and you can see that they are doing some work in a river here. They're collecting macroinvertebrates to study the health of that particular river. But it's important to recognize that there are many things that we might want to emphasize with our students as we are building these virtual contexts. So we want to emphasize the cultural significance. We saw that in the 5 design elements. The environmental, heighten a sense of environmental awareness. Of course, this is a scientific investigation, but it also relies on the cultural attributes, the local history, artistry, and aesthetic appreciation. And of course, all of this builds on academic skills in an interdisciplinary way. So we can see that we can deeply engage our students in a virtual context in times when they're not able to actually go out and get into their waders and get into that river to study that in person. I think we're turning it over to Hema here.
Thank you. Now, looking at all of this through the lens of a teacher, what would that look like? How do we include these virtual contexts as part of our curriculum? One way to look at it is through the standards. How can we include the virtual context to meet our standards? The other way to actually look at it is through the lens of environmental exploration. And the beautiful part about environmental exploration is that it is a multidisciplinary endeavor. What it means is that you can explore your environment, the environment which is right in your backyard, through the lens of storytelling. Personally, when I started teaching 15 years ago, I taught environmental science purely through the content lens. But over the years, I've learned that storytelling is by far the most powerful way. And when you can tie in the storytelling with data, it just makes it that much more powerful. So these virtual contexts could take on the form of stories that are data-based. They could take on the form of looking at what is happening in our environment through an ecological perspective, through a geological perspective. We could explore as both Aida and Ed mentioned, through the systems approach, looking at how the air, the water, the land, the living things, how they all interact with each other. And if we can tie that in through the language arts, through the history, through the engineering, through the mathematics, and the most powerful of all, how it matters to all of us, the ethical aspects of it, all of these can be done through environmental explorations. And I know we, the three of us, are environmental scientists, geoscientists by profession, but I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of teachers who are listening, who are teachers who teach language arts or history or mathematics or engineering, geography. I'm positive that if you look at student-created virtual context through environmental exploration, it is going to be a very powerful tool to not only make the connection meaningful and relevant, but it's going to make it so much more powerful that it empowers them to create new things, to explore new places, and have new experiences, even in this virtual environment. Ed, if you could please move on to the next slide, please.
Thank you, Hema. And so I wanted to take this idea of using a lot of different interdisciplinary ideas in a virtual context and apply that to the example that I showed you. If you think in the upper left, there's the place itself that we were visiting and that we might have gone to collect the images and to start thinking about why we like that place, why we're there, why we want to use it as the focus of our virtual context. As I showed you, I used my markers, I used a little bit of art to show something about that location as well, and also the map. So we're getting into some things with map making or map reading, the historical aspect with the image of the lumber mill, also taking the images and finding out what is in those images and exploring that and researching that. Using information that we've developed from class in the lower left, for example, the systems diagram that's there, and thinking about in terms of data with the graph of the rainfall, and also allowing students to write and to convert those ideas into their own written words. So what we're showing here is that students are able to use a variety of different media and transform ideas from one kind of media, a visual to a written, from a diagram to something that relates to data, from those data to something that might relate to something that's in a photograph, and those transformations become very important. And here's where we start to think about the learning theory involved in the use of virtual contexts. This is a diagram that refers to ways that people learn from media. If we start on the left, we see that instructional media provides a variety of inputs. Those sensory inputs might come as narration and sounds, text, animations, graphics, and so on. That sensory input goes into what's referred to as sensory memory, which is often very short-lived. We don't pay attention to it for a very long time. And then, but we do pay attention to it if something calls it to our attention. If there's some reason why something is noticed, why something is attended to, engaged with, then it goes from that sensory memory into working memory. And we select and we connect it, we organize it with other things that are in our working memory. And ultimately, if we spend enough time with it, it gets integrated into what we refer to as long-term memory. And this is really the idea of what we think about most often as learning, when we're integrating information into long-term memory and using that to connect with prior knowledge, things that we already have in long-term memory. And those are the things that we then retrieve back into working memory when we want to apply them in situations. So it's that integration and retrieval part that we're really working toward helping students to be able to do. And the more we have students transform information between different media formats, the more we promote integration and retrieval of ideas. So using virtual contexts allows us to have students transform ideas between the different media that they might use and think about how they can show what they intend and make decisions for themselves about how they can express their ideas. Aida?
Thank you, Ed. So up to this point, we've done quite a bit of work already. We've taken you on a virtual context tour of a place that's close to Dr. Robeck's home. And we built a case for place-based education and talked about ways that students really can begin to deepen their understanding of the content and of those places. It's time to turn our attention to what we as teachers have to do behind the scenes to make this all work for our students. And so we want to keep our eye on this focus that students are the creators here. They are the ones who are practicing skills of collaboration, if they're doing this in a small group, of creation, of critical thinking, and then finally of communicating their work with us. And so we can see that the students are going to express these ideas in multiple formats. So how do we logistically have students build the virtual contexts? As you could see, as Dr. Robeck did his demonstration, he had his bits and pieces, if you will, for his virtual context collected in a folder. And there are many ways to do that. You can simply collect them in a folder on a desktop. You might collect them in a folder in a Google Drive. But in any case, you do want to have students do some sort of storyboarding. I'm going to use that term. It is a general term. It evokes lots of different logistical bits for many of us who are teachers. Many of us have used different forms of storyboarding. I particularly like doing storyboarding in slides, and you can see an example here of a storyboard that I started. And the way I think of this storyboard using slides is as an outline and as a place to collect all of the pieces, including the text, the imagery, the videos, the data, any bits of narration that I might record or have recorded that would go into my virtual context. And so I build a template that my students could use in slides to collect first their outline of all of the scenes that will go into their virtual context. And then slide by slide, they develop the scene in the next slide. So you can see here in this slide 3 that there are 2 panoramic images that would be the images for the scene. And then moving to the right to the 4th slide, they're starting to collect the text that they will use to describe their points of interest. Again, they may also embed links here to those pictures. They may embed links to videos. They may embed links out to data sources, such as precipitation data or other weather data. They may embed other types of media, including narration that they could record. And then Google Tour Creator does allow you to bring that narration in so that when you're viewing a virtual context, you can hear the voices of the students who are describing that particular place and that point of interest. And through doing that, it really does heighten their sense of place for each one of those points of interest. Now, you might also be thinking about using some sort of tool like slides to storyboard the activity and wondering how you're going to communicate all of that information to students. I find that it's best to do that through a rubric. So there's a close connection between the rows on the rubric and the template that I'm building. So having the scenes and a description of what I'm looking for in terms of a scene, the text that might be associated with it, and having then the points of interest and describing the components that go into those points of interest in my assessment rubric. That provides clear expectations to the students about what it is that they need to collect in their storyboard and then put into their virtual context for their final product. So that's a little bit about how I think about logistically putting that together to present it to my students as a learning opportunity. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mahira.
Thank you. Now, putting on the teacher lens again, how are we going to communicate this to our students? So how do we want our students to create the virtual context? So that's the big question that we're going to try to kind of brainstorm virtually. The first thing is, are we going to have our students create these virtual contexts individually? Or is it going to be through a collaborative team? And if it's individually, how are we going to communicate our expectations with the students? Is it going to be through a rubric like Aida mentioned? Or is it going to be a template that you're going to create where students can add their ideas? If you're not choosing the individual route, if you want a collaborative experience for your students, even in the virtual environment, what is that going to look like? What kinds of tools and techniques would you need as a teacher so that they can have those collaborative experiences? In the collaborative experience, are our students going to have different roles? Is someone going to be a producer who's organizing all the information? Is someone going to be the director who's going to tell everyone where things are going to be? Is someone going to be a communicator where they're sharing all the information? And is someone going to be a team manager who's making sure everyone is on task? And again, keeping in mind, how are we going to communicate all of this information? And I will keep referring back to AIDA and the importance of having a rubric, because that's the best and clearest way to communicate the expectations. So again, although it's a virtual environment, everything is possible. So as teachers, we need to keep in mind, how are we going to communicate our expectations very clearly to the students? Next slide, please.
Thank you for that. We did want to provide you with some additional resources, and so there is a website called Earth Science All Around. The easiest way to access that website is to go to the short link bit.ly/360VFT, VFT for virtual field trip, so bit.ly/360VFT. And on that website, which is pictured in the top left there, you will find links that will take you to all of these slides as well as some others. Thank you, Dr. Robeck, for jumping out there to the site. You'll find some beautiful imagery there, but here on these tiles, you can link to each one of the topics. So you can link to much of the work by Dr. Sumpkin on place-based education. You can link to pages that give you information about a whole variety of your virtual field trips that are available for you to use with your students. In the top right there, you see a link to a page on creating virtual context. These slides are there, as well as the beautiful Venn diagram and some other examples of virtual contexts that were created by teachers in the project that we did this summer around Chesapeake Bay and others. There's a page that talks about Street View imagery. You can also use Google Earth projects as a tool to create these virtual contexts. There's a page that describes how to do that step by step. Google Tour Creator step by step is there as well, with a handy student-friendly getting started guide. So it will picture the screen and then give you descriptions step by step of how to go through creating Google Tour Creator virtual context, as well as ESRI story maps, and then some additional materials are there for you as well. So it's a very rich website, and I invite you to jump out there and take advantage of what's there. Please do feel free to reuse and repurpose and modify those materials for your own use in the classroom. Next slide, please.
Now, in addition to some of the resources that Aida shared on the website, we also identified some very good data-based reports and resources that are very particular to the UAE and the northern part of Africa. These, again, are slides where you can click on them and it takes you to the website. And in these websites, you would be able to not only find the background information, but also very good imagery and data that is related to environmental explorations that can happen just in your neighborhood, in your backyard, in your community. Next slide, please.
So what we've done today is think about this idea of virtual contexts that we can have students create. It's important to think about this in terms of student creation. We can all create them for our students. We can have the students look at the tours that we create, and that has a lot of potential in terms of curriculum instruction. But what we've been focusing on is really working to have students creating their own virtual contexts so that they can have the decision-making power and that they can be transforming the information across the different media as we described. We know that we wanted to get students into the environment as much as possible. And when that becomes possible to take classes on field trips again, we'll be doing that. The virtual field trips allow us to prepare the students for those experiences. The idea that students can go in the field and be comfortable and learn immediately as soon as they get to the field has been tested by a number of different researchers. There's a concept referred to as novelty space that we didn't talk about today very much, or we didn't mention, except in one of the earlier slides it was mentioned. But the idea of novelty space is that students, when they first get to an environmental situation, they can be quite anxious, not knowing what to look for, not knowing what the experience will be, not knowing if they're ready for the experience. So by using virtual context, we can prepare them for those outdoor experiences and make them feel more comfortable and more ready to learn. We can also use virtual context to encourage multiple perspectives, using art, thinking about history, thinking about how they feel, perhaps even writing about the places, using data and mathematics and spatial relationships to explore the place and to understand it even better. And as was said also, the idea of thinking about it in terms of critical perspectives such as ethics and how human impact is influencing the area. We can also respond to and make use of the interdisciplinary character of environmental science, as Hema showed us so well with that diagram that shows the many different ways that environmental science integrates different ideas, everything from chemistry to history to language arts and beyond. And empowering the learners to express their ideas in varied ways so that they actually have the power and the ability to use the expressions that work best for them as individuals and as teams. And then most of all, the focus of our presentation has been on using virtual contexts to promote place-based education and develop that idea of sense of place, where place meanings and place attachments lead us to want to understand and protect a place that is important to us as individuals and as groups. So we did a quick tour through that today. We are very grateful for your attention. If you have questions for any of the three of us, please feel free to send them to me at this email address, and we will respond to them as soon as possible. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I think we have a little bit of time here for some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edward. Thank you so much for each one of you. So let's go to the questions. There is one question. Okay, so it says it could be scaffolded for lower grades with modified versions that are partially completed. Focus more on images that text or simplify text expectations. I don't know if this is the question, but I think it's a comment to share it with you. So what do you have to say about this comment?
Sure. Let me just mention that as was pointed out earlier, this presentation is largely based on a project that we did and are doing actually with Somerset County, Maryland teachers. And the teachers in that county are teaching what in the US is grade 5 and grade 7. So essentially 10-year-olds and 12 to 13-year-olds. So pretty young children, and we think that it can even go earlier because a lot of these tools are very straightforward to use. There's not that many steps involved, not that many places that the students have to get very involved in the technology. And the person is correct that the students can still be making choices about the media to use as they construct a virtual context of their own.
Thank you so much. Just double checking in case if there is more question. I think okay. I think that is the end of the session because I don't see more questions. So thank you again to each individual of you for participating with us today. It's our honor to join us today in this conference. And I hope that you also enjoyed your time of presenting your session with us. So thank you so much. And I wish and I hope that our attendees can really take your valuable expertise, the knowledge that you have shared with us, the resources that you have shared with us, that they can implement it into their educational field. So thank you so much again.
Amira,
Thank you, Amira.
Ask you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for jumping in.
Yeah, tell me. Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you just raise your voice?
Yeah. I'm
Tell
just
me.
saying there are amazing comments on the session. So would you please share them with the presenters? And there are also 2 questions that just popped up.
Oh, okay. So let me see. Is it on the top or is it in the chat box?
In the published Q&A.
The published. Okay,
Yeah.
let me see them then.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. There is a question saying this anonymous person has 2 questions. Where are the panoramic and 360 pictures found? And can virtual trips be used in language subjects? So who can answer this question?
Aida, can you speak to the images?
Of course. There are a number of different resources. More and more, if you do a simple Google image search and you put the word panoramic or just P-A-N-O, pano, at the end of your search, you will find many panoramic images. As well, there is a growing collection on Google Street View. So if you search in Google Street View, you will find many, many panoramic images. And finally, it's very easy to collect panoramic images with your cell phone camera. So I encourage you to have students go out and collect their own panoramic imagery that way. So that's probably the easiest 3 sources: Street View, a Google search for the location, and then panoramic or pano when collecting your own imagery.
Thank you. And I can see a lot of positive comments. It's an appreciation from them. For example, Anshan Basilar said, thank you, this is very helpful. I am looking forward to using this in the class. Thank you, thank you. And the options is endless to make learning more fun and wider than the small world we are in. Thank you so much, Anshan, for this positive comment. We're glad that you really enjoyed it and you benefited from this session. Another comment, another really kind comments. Thank you so much. Very informative session. Thank you so much.
Amira, can we address the other question about the language, the use of this in language classes?
Sorry again?
There was another question about the use of this technique in language classes. Hema, would you like to address that?
Absolutely. I would say yes. Because this is student-generated context, so anything the students want to do is possible. And as I mentioned earlier, because these are virtual contexts and the teachers, we just need to give them guidance on what we want from them. And we're just empowering our kids to explore their creative sides, be it through language, be it through science, be it through engineering. So this is just a tool, and our students have the potential to make it whatever they want. So absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Amira.
Just making sure that I didn't miss any more questions. So just let me check in the chat box. I have to hover here and there. So just a sec. Please bear with me.
You're doing a wonderful job,
Okay.
Amira. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think that is the end of the session because yes, I do get more comments, but when I just open it and it is just, you know, an appreciation. So another thank you note. Thank you. So supervisors, is there any more questions? Maybe because of the tremendous pressure on the network today, I might not get all the comments together. So
yes, Amira, a few more questions are coming up.
Can you read them for me because I don't see it anymore?
Of course. So let me just read them. One of the questions is about, are there any websites to have students to build virtual materials?
So Aida, do you want to take that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time? I missed a word there somehow.
No problem. Are there any websites to have students to build virtual materials?
Yes, to help them build the materials. So
yeah,
I'm not
virtual
sure.
materials.
Yeah.
I think virtual reality, they are looking into VR resources.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, one of the areas that you can go forward from the virtual context, for example, the one that Dr. Robeck showed us earlier, there is a link in the slides that goes to Poly, and from the Poly site, or also from the Google Expeditions site, you can view those images that are the 360 or the panoramic images with a virtual viewer. Let me grab mine here. I'll show you one of the virtual viewers. So you can use a virtual viewer just like this by using your phone here. You can view all of those tours fully in 360. And I always caution my students, you must do this sitting down because it can be very distracting. If you're standing up, you could just topple over. So yes, in terms of the VR experience and really using the full 360 experience, if you build your tour in Google Tour Creator and you upload it then to Poly and share it there, you can view it in full VR with the VR headsets, yes. I think that's what they were asking.
I hope so, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. There is another question about how can one use these in mathematics?
And I can take that question. So the way to use these virtual contexts in mathematics is through data. So you could pick any location, you can collect the data for that one location, and you can actually build out pretty much a story that is driven by data. And that's kind of what a geographic information systems or GIS is all about. And that is the best way to bring in mathematics and make the data a visual source, a way to not just look at data as graphs, but looking at data as maps, looking at data on maps with different colors. And I highly recommend checking out the website that Aida mentioned, because there are sources where you could actually write stories that are data-based using mathematics. So definitely check that website out.
Thank you very much. Couple more questions. And
I don't get any question. I'm not reading any question.
Are you checking, Amira, the published Q&A?
The published, yes. I don't know why it is not working with me, but please
maybe
take the lead. I'm happy. No,
is
it's
it
fine.
Okay?
It's fine. It's fine. You can take the lead because I really want people to hear the questions.
Okay, thank you, Amira. We'll look into this after the webinar.
Yes.
So Najma is asking, where do we find science virtual context? And Kamal is interested in what other intuitive software would you recommend for creating virtual environments? So I just grouped them together because they seem to be related.
So I'll address that initially. If you're not going to be using Google Tour Creator, if that's not available to you, Then another tool that I find to be an excellent tool, it's very easy to use as well, is the new Google Earth, the web-based version, Google Earth Web, which now offers a tool called Projects. And on the website that I showed, Earth Science All Around, there is an entire page devoted to Google Earth projects. There's a step-by-step guide there, as well as links to some sample tours that were created that way. That is a new tool for Google Earth. They are continuing to develop the tool, and more functionality, I believe, will become available through that tool. So I would recommend Google Earth projects as one option. Also, a second option would be ESRI story maps, which is also available to students for use, and they can build out their tours in ESRI story maps as well. So those are two tools that are available. And Dr. Roebuck, did you want to address the other question?
Well, I'll just mention too that on the Earth Science All Around website, in the virtual tours link, that the tile that Aida showed, there is a link to some colleagues of ours at Arizona State University. They have a center called Education Through Exploration, or ETX, and they also create virtual tours really worldwide, and those are very scientific. It depends a little bit on the level of your students for those. You can also search Poly for virtual tours that other people have created and made public as well, so that those can be pre-created virtual tours that you can make available. If you want to send an email to one of us, we have a few that some friends of ours have made. There's ones about national parks, for example, in the US and other places that can also be used for science education, environmental science teaching.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I just want, wanted to make one other note. I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you do search for Earth Science All Around, you will get to that website. There were a couple comments in the chat that I was looking at that were asking about the slides, and those slides that we used today are also available on the website. So please do go there and download the slides from there. Thank you.
I think they're also being made available by the forum.
Okay, thanks. Are you ready for a last question?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like some people are interested in how the websites, and I think you mentioned some of them for Cycle 1, Grade 3 and 4, and the potential ways to apply what you just shared in Grades 3 and 4.
For my part, speaking from, I've never been a grade 3 to 4 teacher. I've taught grades earlier than that, and I've taught grades after that. But the thing that I think would be really important for younger students would be to structure the storytelling that they're doing, to help them understand the steps that they need to go through to make decisions about what kinds of ideas they want to convey to their audience. They're very early writers. And they're going to be very early in this process as well. So guiding them, scaffolding this experience so that they understand who their audience is, why they're conveying ideas in the first place, and what media they can use to convey those ideas. And then they'll probably need some help assembling the media into the virtual contexts, but they also often have very creative ideas about what they want to tell and why they're telling it and what they're excited about. So my last point here would be to really follow their passion, follow their emotion and their excitement about what it is that they want to tell about the place and the things that they want to convey about the place as it's meaningful to them. That sense of place becomes very important in that kind of an idea.
I will add here as well to remember that in Google Tour Creator, there is the ability to add narration. So the students can record their voices. If they're not going to type it out in text, they can record their narration and include that with the tour, which they really enjoy.
That's a good point. Thank you, Aida.
That's great.
Thank
So
you.
do you have more questions? Because now I can
That's
see
it. That's it for now, Amira. And thank you so much. And sorry for
Thank you
jumping
so
in.
much. Thank you so much. That was very interactive. I think it's really positive that we all communicated with each other. And I hope that the audience really enjoyed it. And I hope that we answered all your questions. We didn't leave any question left for you. So thank you so much. Again, Dr. Edward, all the beloved attendees who joined Dr. Edward today. And thank you so much, supervisors. Thank you to everyone who, the attendees who also here with us or attending this session. And we reached to the end of this session, so I can only say thank you again to everyone.
And thank you, Amira, very much for your facilitation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And to the
everyone. Enjoy the rest of
supervisors
your
as well.
conference.
We appreciate your help.
Today. Thank you.